because we don't like somebody doesn't mean that we can't occasionally engage in conversations with them.
Well, finally, a vice presidential candidate who makes sense. But guess what? For some reason, mainstream media does not want you to hear it. I'm Ben Swann, and this is Truth in Media. All right, Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance just pulled off the trifecta, going on all three of the mainstream media's Sunday talk shows. And what he said, they're not liking.
And I don't want to be in a war with Vladimir Putin's Russia. I think that we should try to pursue avenues of peace. I'd also call China certainly a competitor, but we're not in a war with China either.
Scary stuff, right? Well, not really. You just heard snippets from his sit down on Meet the Press. In that conversation, he effectively gave the media a crash course in actual diplomacy. But wait, there's more, because it didn't stop there. Vance also took CNN to task, directly calling out Jake Tapper for the network's coverage on everything from Russia to social media. Listen to this.
Ask yourself a basic question about network integrity. You guys talked about the Russia hoax nonstop.
The FBI was investigating it. The FBI was investigating it, and so we covered them.
And so you took the words of unnamed FBI agents and put them on your network as if they were the gospel truth. You did it again and again.
Now, the mainstream media is using all this to spin a narrative that J.D. Vance and his running mate Donald Trump are in cahoots with enemies like Russia and China. They want you to think our democracy hangs in the balance, all without giving you any real context.
I don't think that we should set American foreign policy based on a foreign country spreading videos on social media. I think we should set American foreign policy based on what's in our best interest as a United States.
So while they want you to fear J.D. Vance, they're ignoring the clear fact. He is pushing for a change in perspective. He's not talking about cozying up to dictators. He's advocating for a reset in how we approach the real world. Why do we have to go to war over something as trivial as social media posts?
We have Elon Musk talking directly to the Kremlin and ensuring that every time the Russians put out something like this, it gets 5 million views on X before anybody can catch it. So it's quite dangerous.
Now that sounds really crazy. Isn't it time to rethink our priorities? Well, meanwhile, issues truly impacting your vote are being ignored. Like a pair of fires at ballot boxes in Washington and Oregon that are now being investigated as acts of arson. Or a judge in Georgia making it a law that election officials need to certify the results even if voter fraud is expected. The problem with that is that Democrats are also suing to prevent drop box surveillance, hand counting ballots, and voter ID protections, all things that can add trust to the final vote. So where's the outrage there? Where is the media coverage? You see, the mainstream has shifted gears in recent weeks. Instead of focusing on policies and election matters, they are opting for a strategy of fear. Just look at the New York Times front page this Sunday, a full attack on former President Donald Trump while giving praise to Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, you have other newspapers that appear to be reading the winds and backing away from their support of Harris, like Jeff Bezos, who has lost the Wall Street Journal over 200,000 subscribers after they decided to cling to independence. USA Today is also now jumping on the bandwagon, and now the LA Times will also not endorse a candidate for the first time in 2 decades. What matters are issues like Virginia's Democrats suing to keep non-citizens on the state voter rolls. Now that's a direct impact on your vote. And it's especially troubling since polls show Trump is actually gaining ground in blue states like Virginia and even in Minnesota. So while they play games using sensationalism and misrepresentation, they ignore the points of Vance's perspective. Constructive dialogue and a focus on genuine issues are what we need. And it's time to hold mainstream media accountable. Joining me now to discuss, I'm joined by Jeffrey Tucker. He is the founder and president of the Brownstone Institute. Jeffrey, great to have you here.
Thank you.
So what do you make of Vance's comments here? You know, this interview he does where essentially he's asked, you know, aren't you afraid of the fact that Russia made a video that's on social media? And you can see the tiny explosions going off in Margaret Brennan's head when he says, this isn't worth going to war over. And they don't really seem to understand that. They're so indoctrinated with their own propaganda that they actually believe this is something that you should fire a nuke over.
It's so refreshing to see Vance speak, because he says all the things that we all say in private and have known for years about the entrenched biases, to say the least, of the mainstream media. It's just become preposterous and ridiculous in this campaign season when, you know, you open up the New York Times and they described that Trump rally at Madison Square Garden. I watched it from beginning to end, and apart from a couple of tasteless jokes, it was just a joy fest of Americanism. You know, even if you could disagree with that policy, it was interesting and fun and fascinating and really people oriented. And then the New York Times had this story that I couldn't believe it. I don't know what they were describing, but it wasn't what I saw. It was crazy. And then the next day, Jeff Bezos went to the Washington Post and denounced his own newspaper for their of what he called, speaking to a rarefied number of elites rather than to the people. And he blew the whistle and said, "This has just got to stop." A very satisfying editorial. This is by a guy who understands something about the need to serve customers. and the people running the mainstream media have forgotten about the customers. They're nursing their ideological grievances entirely. That's what they see their job as doing. They're social justice warriors and wokesters, and they're preaching and lecturing to the rest of us about the way they wish the world would work, instead of speaking to the realities all around us. So Bezos's editorial, the New York Times, absurd, truly over-the-top coverage of the Madison Square Garden event, likening it to a 1939 Nazi rally as if nothing has happened in Madison Square Garden ever since. It was
Right.
and this caps an entire season of preposterous bias that caps an entire decade of outrageous distortions, to the point that like, even for me, I wonder sometimes how much I've believed from the mainstream media that just was simply not true. I mean, based on the latest things that I know for sure to be false because I watched them, it really discredits the entire enterprise. And now there's very strong talk, and I think it makes sense, of actually auctioning off the beachfront spectrum property that are monopolistically owned by the major networks and given to them for free, even though they're worth tens of billions of dollars, just taking it away and say, you can buy it back. And the money goes to the treasury to pay off the national debt. Or maybe somebody else has a higher value for it, but we're going to start operating a genuine market now, instead of letting these cartels own this enormously valuable property for free, with a privilege and a monopoly that dates all the way from the 1950s. Like, we need to just get rid of this at this point.
Yeah.
This isn't censorship or punishment or being vindictive. It's just a matter of having the free competition for valuable property. And I think that's an excellent idea. And I hope the Trump campaign picks it up. It seems like they're about to.
Yeah, I think they will. And to your point, look, this is not about punishing people. It is about the fact that this is essentially free broadcast space that's been handed over to these companies that are only supposed to operate it in the public interest.
Right.
That's why they're supposed to have it in the first place. But it's very clear they're not operating in the public interest. And to the point of Jeff Bezos, or the point of anybody else, whether it's the LA Times, Gannett newspapers, that are now saying we're not going to endorse a candidate, I do think there is, at least within some media, a recognition something unique is happening. This is not just a MAGA issue. You talked about Madison Square Garden. It is not just the right? It is bringing the left into that. Trump is surrounded by more people who are famously left right now than right. And so it's very interesting to see how there's this coalition of libertarians, classical liberals, even some progressives who have moved over into his camp, along with independents and Republicans. He represents a much wider swath. And if you don't recognize that, who are you serving other than a few elites? I'll give you the last word here.
The realignment in American politics, and really it's not just American politics, it's all over the world, is the least reported story. We are seeing a completely new coalitions form. I can tell you, founding Brownstone Institute, most of our best writers are ex-progressives in a sense. They were schooled in that sort of left-wing tradition, and see the regime, and it's a global regime, violating everybody's freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of bodily autonomy with the vaccine shots. It was too much. So we're seeing a formation of something completely different that I can only describe as a ruling class elite versus everybody else, regardless of left and right. And that is a complete rescrambling of anything that we've seen in my lifetime. It represents a dramatic paradigm shift where everything is coming into question, even to the point that Trump is talking about eliminating the income tax itself. So that's where we are. The old paradigm is broken and a new one is replacing it.
We'll see how quickly it replaces it 1 week from today.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Tucker, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
That is our show. You can catch all of our latest coverage on the race. Check us out on X at @truth_in_media, and you can watch all of our full episodes at truthinmedia.com.